Tutoriales de gramática.
Grammar tutorials.
Presente indicativo 2.
Present indicative. Part 2. Irregular verbs in the present. Verbs with irregular yo endings. Some verbs undergo changes that affect only the first person singular conjugation, yo. In some verbs, often called go verbs, a G appears before the usual O ending that corresponds to yo.
Poner. Yo pongo, tú pones, vos ponés, él, ella, usted pone, nosotros, nosotras ponemos, vosotros, vosotras ponéis, ellos, ellas, ustedes ponen.
Other verbs.
Salir, salgo. Valer, valgo. Traer, traigo. Caer, caigo.
With verbs that end in ser and usir, the C in the stem becomes ZC in the first person singular.
Conocer, yo conozco, tú conoces, vos conocés, él, ella, usted conoce, nosotros, nosotras conocemos, vosotros, vosotras conocéis, ellos, ellas, ustedes conocen.
Other verbs.
Nacer, nazco. Parecer, parezco.
And other verbs require other kinds of changes in the present that only affect the conjugation of the first person singular.
Dar, yo, doy, tú, das, él, ella, usted, da, nosotros, nosotras, damos, vosotros, vosotras, dais, ellos, ellas, ustedes, dan.
Other verbs.
Caber, quepo. Ver, veo. Saber, sé. Hacer, hago.
Stem-changing verbs in the present indicative. Forms. Many verbs in Spanish are known as stem-changing verbs. That is, in the present indicative, the last vowel in the stem of the verb sometimes changes. In some verbs, the E in the stem turns into IE for all the conjugations except nosotros, nosotras, vosotros, vosotras, and vos. There are examples of AR, ER, and IR verbs that are stem-changing.
Pensar. Yo pienso, tú piensas, vos pensás, él, ella, usted piensa, nosotros, nosotras pensamos, vosotros, vosotras pensáis, ellos, ellas, ustedes piensan.
Other verbs.
Empezar, perder, querer, preferir, sentir.
In other verbs, the O found in the stem turns into UE once again in all the conjugations except nosotros, nosotras, vosotros, vosotras, vos. This kind of stem change can take place in AR, ER, or IR verbs. Along the same lines as the verbs in this column, the U of jugar also turns into UE.
Recordar. Yo recuerdo, tú recuerdas, vos recordás, él, ella, usted recuerda, nosotros, nosotras recordamos, vosotros, vosotras recordáis, ellos, ellas, ustedes recuerdan.
Other verbs.
Costar, encontrar, volar, poder, volver, dormir, morir. Jugar. Yo juego, tú juegas.
Finally, in other verbs, the E found in the stem turns into I, except for nosotros, nosotras, vosotros, vosotras, and vos. This kind of change only occurs in IR verbs.
Pedir. Yo pido, tú pides, vos, pedís, él, ella, usted, pide, nosotros, nosotras, pedimos, vosotros, vosotras, pedís, ellos, ellas, ustedes, piden.
Other verbs.
Competir, reír, repetir, seguir. ¿Qué piensas hacer este sábado? ¿Recuerdas aquella pizzería tan buena del centro? Pues seguramente pido unas pizzas ahí y llamo a mis amigos. ¿Quieres venir?
Verbs with more than one irregularity in the present indicative. Forms. Some Spanish verbs have both a change in the first person, such as adding the letter G, and stem changes in the conjugations of other persons, except for nosotros, nosotras, vosotros, vosotras, and vos. Whenever you learn a new infinitive, be sure to look carefully for the kinds of changes it may undergo during conjugation. Verbs with more than one irregularity.
Tener. Tengo, tienes, tenés, tiene, tenemos, tenéis, tienen. Decir. Digo, dices, decís, dice, decimos, decís, dicen. Venir. Vengo, vienes, venís, viene, venimos, venís, vienen.
Other kinds of irregular verbs. Forms. Finally, some verbs are irregular in unique ways, which is to say that they do not follow any of the patterns we've seen so far. Other kinds of irregular verbs.
Estar. Estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, están. Ir. Voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, van. Ser. Soy, eres, sos, es, somos, sois, son.
Changes in spelling. When we conjugate verbs whose infinitives end in her, hir, and gir, we must remember to change the letters to follow spelling rules and to make sure the written word represents how the word is spoken.
Yo dirijo orquestas. Yo extingo incendios.
For verbs that end in uir, like construir, huir, distribuir, etc., the first person singular conjugation ends in yo, spelled with a Y.
Yo construyo casas.
For most verbs, it's impossible to predict if it's irregular or not just by looking at the infinitive form. Memorizing a saying or an expression can be very helpful for testing if your conjugation is on track.
Si quieres, puedes.
Present indicative. Uses. In the tutorial titled Present Indicative, Part 1, you learned that the present indicative is used 1. To talk about things happening in the present moment, 2. To refer to habitual actions, 3. To offer descriptions and definitions, and 4. To express universal truths that transcend chronological time. In this tutorial, we will learn 2 more uses of the present indicative. The present indicative is used to talk about actions or states that began in the past and continue on in the present moment.
Vivo aquí desde 2017.
In Spanish, the present indicative also works for talking about the future. It permits us to present a future action as a done deal, such as when we talk about already settled upon plans we have committed to, or events that we are absolutely sure will happen.
Esta tarde tengo una reunión, pues yo voy a una fiesta con mis amigos.